Why are you closing for good? The billionaire CEO asked the single mom baker she once fired. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's heartfelt story about two women whose lives become forever connected through loss, forgiveness, resilience, and an unexpected journey toward love, I would like to ask for one small favor. Please subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story. It only takes a moment, it is completely free, and your support helps us continue sharing emotional, inspiring, and unforgettable stories about courage, healing, second chances, and love between women. Your support truly means more to us than words can express. Before we begin, I would also love to know where you are watching from today. Please share your city or country in the comments below. Thank you so much for being here. Now, let us return to our main character and the extraordinary moment that quietly changed the course of her life forever. People always think the hardest part of losing a dream is the day it disappears, but they never imagine how much harder it is when the person who took it away quietly walks back into your life. I learned that on the cool October morning I taped a plain white sheet of paper to the front window of my bakery. The words "permanently closed" looked strangely calm, almost gentle, compared to the storm that had been growing inside me for months. I stood there for a long moment with the roll of tape still in my hand, staring at my own reflection in the glass instead of the sign itself. Behind me, the familiar scent of butter, cinnamon, and freshly baked sourdough still floated through the little shop as if nothing had changed. The old brick oven hummed softly, the display case held a few remaining loaves, and sunlight filtered through the front windows, warming the worn wooden floors that had carried thousands of footsteps over the past 5 years. To anyone passing by, it probably looked like another cozy neighborhood bakery beginning another ordinary Friday. Only I knew it would be the last. "Mom?" Lily's small voice broke the silence behind me. "Does this mean we won't make birthday cakes anymore?" I turned around and forced the kind of smile every parent learns to wear when the truth feels too heavy for a child to carry. Lily stood beside the counter wearing one of my oversized aprons, the hem almost touching her sneakers. A streak of flour stretched across her cheek because she had insisted on helping me decorate pumpkin cookies before school. She looked so hopeful that for a second I almost ripped the sign off the window and pretended everything would somehow work itself out. "We'll always find something beautiful to make," I told her, brushing a loose strand of blonde hair behind her ear. "Maybe it just won't be here." She nodded as children often do when they sense adults are protecting them from something they cannot yet understand. She didn't ask another question. Instead, she carefully placed the last tray of cinnamon rolls into the display case, making sure each one faced exactly the same direction. Watching her reminded me why I had fought so hard to keep this little bakery alive long after the numbers stopped making sense. This place had never simply been my business. It had been proof that one terrible decision made by someone else would never completely define my life. 5 years earlier, I had walked out of a corporate office carrying a cardboard box filled with framed photos, a coffee mug, and a future I no longer recognized. Since then, every loaf of bread, every pie, every birthday cake had quietly whispered the same promise to me: you survived. You kept going. You built something honest with your own hands. I believed that promise until rising rent, higher ingredient costs, and another slow summer finally caught up with me. I had done the math 100 different ways. There simply wasn't enough left to keep the lights on another month. The bell above the bakery door jingled softly as a cool breeze drifted inside. I assumed it was another regular customer coming to say goodbye. Instead, a sleek black luxury sedan rolled to a stop across the street. The driver remained inside while the rear passenger door slowly opened. A woman stepped onto the sidewalk wearing a charcoal coat tailored with quiet elegance rather than flashy wealth. Even from across the street, I recognized the confident way she carried herself. My heart forgot how to beat for one long, impossible second. Victoria Hayes. The billionaire CEO who had signed the paperwork ending my career stood silently beneath the golden leaves, her eyes fixed on the freshly taped sign in my window before they finally lifted to meet mine. Victoria did not move right away. She simply stood on the opposite side of the street as if the little bakery had become the most important building she had ever seen. Cars rolled past between us, people carried shopping bags along the sidewalk, and somewhere farther down Main Street a church bell marked 10 o'clock, yet everything around me seemed to fade into a distant blur. 5 years had passed since I had last looked into those familiar green eyes, but memory has a strange way of ignoring calendars. Some faces never really leave you. Lily noticed the woman before I said a single word. "Mom, is that someone you know?" she whispered. I swallowed carefully before answering. "A long time ago, yes." Victoria finally crossed the street without any security guards surrounding her, without assistants carrying tablets or answering phones, without any of the invisible wall of importance that had always seemed to follow her in every business magazine photograph. She reached the bakery door and hesitated before pulling it open. The small brass bell chimed softly above her head. For just a second she looked around the room instead of at me. Her eyes wandered across the old wooden shelves, the chalkboard menu, the display filled with fresh bread, and the tiny reading corner where neighborhood children often sat with cookies and hot chocolate after school. I wondered what she saw. A failing business? Or a life she had never imagined I would build after walking away from hers? "Claire," she finally said, her voice quieter than I remembered. "It has been a long time." I folded my arms across my apron, more to steady myself than to appear distant. "Long enough." She nodded slightly, accepting the weight behind those two words. "I drove here because someone told me this bakery was closing today." Apparently news travels fast. I did not believe it until I saw the sign. I glanced toward the front window. "Now you know it is true." Silence settled between us again, but it was not an empty silence. It carried years of unanswered questions, unfinished conversations, and consequences neither of us could erase. Lily looked from one of us to the other before quietly carrying a tray of cookies into the kitchen, sensing that adults sometimes needed privacy for conversations children could not yet understand. Victoria stepped closer to the counter but kept a respectful distance. "I came because I wanted to understand what happened." A small laugh escaped before I could stop it. It was not amused. It was tired. Understand? 5 years ago there was not much interest in understanding. She lowered her eyes for a brief moment. "You are right." Those 3 words surprised me more than I expected. I had imagined dozens of possible conversations over the years. I had imagined excuses, legal explanations, polished corporate language, even complete indifference. I had never imagined immediate agreement. She looked around the bakery once more before speaking again. "This place is beautiful." I followed her gaze to the rows of fresh sourdough cooling beside pumpkin muffins and apple pies. "It took a lot of early mornings." "It shows." An elderly customer entered just then, smiling warmly as he removed his baseball cap. "Morning, Claire. I heard the news and wanted to buy 2 extra loaves before you disappear on us." I smiled automatically, wrapping his bread in brown paper while he chatted about his grandchildren visiting for the weekend. Before leaving, he leaned across the counter and gently squeezed my hand. "This town is better because of you. Do not ever forget that." He walked out carrying his bread, never realizing who stood only a few feet away watching the exchange in complete silence. When the door closed, Victoria spoke so softly I almost missed it. "They love you here." "They know me here," I answered. "There is a difference." She looked directly into my eyes again, and for the first time I noticed something I had never associated with Victoria Hayes before. Regret. Real, quiet, unmistakable regret. Then she reached into her leather portfolio, removed a thick cream-colored file, and carefully placed it on the wooden counter between us. "Claire," she said, "there is something about your case that I only discovered 3 weeks ago, and I do not think either of us has been told the whole truth." I stared at the folder resting on the counter, but I made no attempt to touch it. 5 years earlier, a different folder had changed my life forever, and I still remembered the sound of paper sliding across a polished conference table while people avoided looking me in the eye. I was not eager to relive that feeling. Victoria kept both of her hands folded in front of her, almost as if she understood that every inch she moved toward me would only make me step farther away. "Open it when you are ready," she said quietly. "I am not here to pressure you." I let out a slow breath before shaking my head. "You are asking the wrong thing." She looked confused. "Then tell me the right thing." "The right question is why I should believe anything inside that folder." Her expression softened, but she did not argue. Instead, she nodded once. "That is fair." The honesty in those two words unsettled me more than any carefully rehearsed explanation ever could. I finally rested one hand on the folder without opening it. "Do you remember how long my meeting lasted?" I asked. Victoria answered almost immediately. 15 minutes. "Do you remember what I kept saying?" She hesitated. Her eyes drifted toward the bakery window before returning to mine. "You said there had been a mistake." I smiled without any happiness. "I said it 6 times. The bakery felt unusually quiet. Even the oven seemed to hum more softly, as if the room itself were listening. I asked someone to check my computer. I asked someone to verify where I had been that afternoon. I asked for one more day. Nobody said yes. Victoria closed her eyes for a brief second. "I know." "No," I replied gently. "You know now. Back then you signed the papers." The words hung between us, impossible to take back and impossible to deny. She did not defend herself. She did not mention company policy or legal advice or executive responsibility. Instead, she reached into her coat pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. It was old enough for the edges to have softened with time. "I kept this," she said. "It is your exit interview." My heartbeat quickened. I remembered filling out that form with trembling hands before leaving the building for the last time. She unfolded it carefully. "At the bottom you wrote one sentence." She looked at me before reading it aloud. "I hope one day someone cares enough to find out what really happened." I had forgotten writing those words. Hearing them spoken inside my little bakery felt strangely unreal, like listening to someone else's voice echo across the years. Victoria carefully folded the paper again. 3 weeks ago I found that interview while reviewing archived compliance files for an unrelated audit. I almost skipped it. She paused before continuing. "Something about your sentence stayed with me." I finally opened the folder. Inside were copies of system reports, internal emails, security logs, and handwritten notes covered with yellow tabs. None of it made immediate sense, but one page caught my attention. My employee identification number appeared beside a computer access record with a timestamp I recognized immediately. "That cannot be right," I whispered. "At that exact time Lily had a high fever." Victoria nodded. "I know." My fingers tightened around the page. She was 3 years old. I took her to Cedar Grove Family Clinic that afternoon. My voice grew quieter as the memory returned. She fell asleep on my shoulder while we waited for the doctor. Victoria slowly slid another document across the counter. It was a copy of the clinic visit confirmation. The date matched perfectly. The appointment time overlapped with the computer activity that had supposedly proved I was responsible. I looked from the document to Victoria, struggling to understand what I was seeing. If this existed, I asked carefully, why was I fired? She met my eyes without looking away. "That is exactly the question I have spent the last 3 weeks trying to answer, and every document I uncover makes me believe someone wanted the investigation to end before anyone looked too closely." For several seconds I could not speak. I simply stared at the clinic confirmation beside the security log, watching 2 pieces of paper quietly dismantle a story that had controlled my life for 5 long years. The bakery suddenly felt smaller, not because the room had changed, but because the past had somehow found a way to stand beside us. I remembered carrying Lily through the clinic parking lot with a thermometer still tucked inside my purse, praying her fever would finally break before morning. While I had been rocking my little girl to sleep in a waiting room chair, someone inside that corporate office had apparently been using my employee credentials. The thought should have made me feel relieved, Instead, it made my chest ache even more. "Do you know what hurts the most?" I asked softly. Victoria remained silent, giving me space to continue. "It is not finding out that I might have been innocent all along. It is realizing that someone could have discovered this years ago if they had simply cared enough to look." She lowered her eyes. "You are right." I shook my head slowly. After I lost that job, every interview ended the same way. They smiled until they called my former employer. Then suddenly they decided to move forward with another candidate. I laughed quietly, remembering conversations I had tried so hard to forget. One hiring manager actually told me I seemed qualified, but they could not ignore a termination involving confidential information. My fingers brushed the edge of the wooden counter where countless customers had rested cups of coffee over the years. Eventually, I stopped telling people I used to work in corporate leadership. It sounded like I was talking about someone else. Victoria listened without interrupting. There was no phone in her hand, no assistant waiting outside the door, no attempt to solve my pain with promises or money. She simply listened. That alone felt unfamiliar. "So I borrowed against my savings," I continued. "I bought second-hand ovens, painted these walls myself, repaired broken shelves with online tutorials, and learned how to make bread because flour did not ask about my employment history." My eyes wandered across the bakery. Every scratch on the wooden floor, every uneven shelf, every faded photograph hanging beside the register suddenly looked like another chapter of survival. "People think this bakery saved me because it became successful." I smiled faintly. "The truth is, it saved me long before that. It gave me one place where nobody looked at me like I had already failed." At that moment the front door opened again, and Martha Henderson stepped inside carrying a small bouquet of autumn flowers wrapped in brown paper. "I heard today was the last day," she said warmly. "These belong on your counter." She noticed Victoria standing nearby but simply smiled politely before turning back to me. "When my husband passed away, you baked cinnamon bread every Saturday for 3 months and refused to let me pay for it. You probably thought nobody noticed, but kindness has a way of staying with people." She placed the flowers beside the cash register and gently squeezed my shoulder before leaving as quietly as she had arrived. Neither Victoria nor I spoke until the bell above the door settled into silence again. Finally she whispered, "I have been reading reports about your case for weeks. None of them ever mentioned people like Martha." "Because spreadsheets do not measure kindness," I answered. "They measure risk." Victoria looked around the bakery once more, her eyes lingering on the handwritten notes customers had pinned to a community bulletin board filled with thank you cards, children's drawings, and local announcements. "Claire," she said carefully, "I came here believing I was trying to correct a mistake in an old investigation. Now I think I underestimated what that mistake actually destroyed." Before I could answer, her cell phone vibrated across the wooden counter. She glanced at the screen, and for the first time since arriving, the calm expression on her face disappeared. She answered quietly, listened without saying a word, and then ended the call. When she looked back at me, there was a mixture of disbelief and determination in her eyes. "Someone inside the company just tried to block access to the remaining archived records," she said. "Which means whoever buried the truth 5 years ago may have just realized I am getting close to finding them." Victoria slipped her phone back into her coat pocket, but the quiet confidence she had carried into the bakery was gone. For the first time since she had walked through my door, she looked like someone standing on uncertain ground. I folded the folder closed and leaned against the counter, unsure whether I should feel hopeful or exhausted. 5 years of unanswered questions could not be repaired by one afternoon, no matter how convincing the evidence seemed. "What happens now?" I finally asked. Victoria looked toward the front window where golden leaves drifted across Main Street before answering. "Now someone inside my company knows I am reopening the investigation. That means they are afraid of what I might find." I let those words settle. Fear had controlled my life for years. Fear of another rejection letter. Fear of losing the bakery. Fear of disappointing Lily. It felt strange to imagine someone else carrying that burden instead. You could stop, I said quietly. Nobody expects you to keep digging. She gave a faint smile that carried more sadness than confidence. I expect me to keep digging. Before I could respond, Lily walked out from the kitchen carrying 2 steaming mugs. I made hot chocolate, she announced proudly. One for Mom and one for our guest. Victoria looked surprised. Thank you, Lily. It is not as good as Mom's, Lily admitted with complete honesty, but I am getting better. Victoria accepted the mug with both hands. I think getting better is one of the most important things anyone can do. Lily smiled, satisfied with the answer, before returning to finish her homework at the small table near the back window. Watching the exchange unsettled me in an entirely different way. Victoria was not trying to impress anyone. She spoke to my daughter with the same patience she had shown me, and somehow that made it harder to keep seeing her only as the woman who had signed my termination papers. We stood in silence for a while, sipping the warm chocolate as customers wandered in one by one after seeing the closing notice. Every person seemed to have a story. A firefighter thanked me for opening early every Thanksgiving morning. A young teacher reminded me that our free bread basket had quietly helped several struggling families through the winter. A college student said the bakery had been the first place where she felt welcome after moving to town alone. Victoria listened to every conversation without interrupting. She did not introduce herself or mention her company. She simply observed the life that had grown inside these walls while I had been rebuilding mine. After the last customer left, she turned toward me. I spent years reading quarterly reports about community investment, she said. Today I realized none of those reports ever captured what one person can mean to a town. I smiled faintly. That does not pay the electric bill. No, she admitted. But it explains why this place deserves another chance. I looked at her carefully. If you are about to offer me money, please do not. She shook her head immediately. I am not here to buy your bakery. Or save it? No. Her answer came so naturally that I believed her. Then why are you here? Victoria rested her mug on the counter before speaking. Because I cannot ask for forgiveness while benefiting from a lie that destroyed someone else's future. Before I think about helping your bakery, I have to help restore your name. Something inside me shifted, almost too quietly to notice. Not trust. Not yet. Perhaps it was simply the realization that she finally understood what I had needed all along. I had never wanted someone to rescue me. I had wanted someone to believe I deserved the truth. Just then Victoria's phone vibrated once more. She read the new message, and the color slowly drained from her face. She looked directly at me before turning the screen so I could read a single sentence from her chief legal officer. Eleanor Price has requested immediate access to all archived compliance files and instructed the Records Department to suspend external review pending executive authorization. Victoria slowly lowered the phone and whispered, "She is moving faster than I expected, which means Eleanor Price may already know exactly what those missing records will reveal." For the rest of that afternoon, I expected Victoria to leave, return to her world of boardrooms and private meetings, and disappear from my life again. Instead, she surprised me in the simplest possible way. The next morning, just after 6 o'clock, the little bell above the bakery door rang while the sky was still painted with soft shades of blue and gold. I looked up from shaping sourdough loaves and saw Victoria walking inside wearing a plain navy sweater instead of an expensive business suit. She carried no leather portfolio, no assistant followed behind her, and the only thing in her hand was a paper cup of black coffee. "Good morning," she said with an uncertain smile. "I hope I am not too early." I glanced at the clock. "You are only about an hour before most people willingly wake up." She laughed quietly, the sound awkward but genuine. "I brought my own coffee because I remembered you always said the first pot belongs to the bakers." I blinked in surprise. "You remember that? You said it during one of our employee appreciation breakfasts almost 6 years ago." I had completely forgotten saying it. Apparently she had not. She purchased a single loaf of whole wheat bread, paid the full price without hesitation, and thanked me exactly as every other customer did. There was no attempt to offer extra money, no suggestion that she could solve my financial problems with one generous check. After she left, I assumed that would be the end of it. I was wrong. She returned the following morning. Then again the day after that. Every visit was almost identical. One loaf of bread. One quiet conversation. One sincere thank you before she walked back onto Main Street. By the end of the week, even Martha Henderson waved at her as though she had become another regular customer. One chilly Tuesday morning, Victoria arrived while I was struggling to carry a 50-pound bag of flour from the delivery truck into the kitchen. Without saying a word, she set down her coffee, rolled up the sleeves of her sweater, and lifted the bag onto her shoulder. "You do not have to do that," I said. "I know," she replied. "I wanted to." She carried it inside, brushed the flour dust from her hands, and smiled after accidentally leaving a white handprint across the front of her dark sweater. Lily giggled from behind the counter. "You look like a real baker now." Victoria looked down at herself and laughed. "I suppose that is what happens when someone spends too much time in the right place." Something inside me softened as I watched them smile at each other. It was not because she had carried one bag of flour. It was because she had never once acted as though helping made her more important than anyone else. During the next several days, she quietly introduced me to the director of a local small business resource center, not as someone who needed charity but as a talented entrepreneur whose bakery deserved another opportunity. She also suggested a weekend baking class for families after noticing how often children wandered into the shop with their parents. "People already trust you," she said while arranging fresh muffins inside the display case after asking permission to help. "Sometimes a business grows because it discovers another way to serve the same community." The idea stayed with me longer than I expected. Every morning our conversations became a little easier. We talked about bread recipes, favorite books, small towns, and the strange comfort of familiar routines. Sometimes we simply stood beside the front window drinking coffee while the first sunlight reached Main Street. Neither of us mentioned forgiveness. Neither of us mentioned the investigation unless new information appeared. Then, just before closing one evening, Victoria's phone rang. She listened in complete silence before ending the call. When she looked at me, the warmth that had slowly returned to her face disappeared. "The independent forensic team recovered part of the deleted archive," she said quietly. "They found evidence that your employee account was accessed by someone using executive administrative privileges, and there was only one person authorized to approve that level of access at the time. Eleanor Price is no longer just connected to the investigation. She is becoming the center of it." The word stayed with me long after Victoria left the bakery that evening. Eleanor Price. Until that moment she had been nothing more than a name from another chapter of my life, someone whose office I had passed countless times without giving much thought. Now that name suddenly carried the weight of 5 missing years. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes I remembered sitting in that conference room, trying to explain where I had been while strangers quietly decided my future without listening. By sunrise I was already kneading dough, letting the familiar rhythm steady my thoughts. Flour, water, salt, patience. Bread had always made more sense to me than people. Bread responded to honesty. If you rushed it, it failed. If you cared for it, it rewarded you. Human beings were rarely so predictable. Just after 7 o'clock the bell above the front door rang, and Victoria stepped inside carrying no coffee this time. Her expression told me everything before she spoke. "The forensic team finished their preliminary report early this morning," she said. I wiped my hands on my apron and nodded toward the small table by the window. We sat facing one another while Lily quietly worked on a school art project nearby, humming softly as she colored autumn leaves across a sheet of construction paper. Victoria carefully opened a slim folder and slid one page toward me. The deleted records were recovered. My eyes moved across lines of technical information that I could barely understand until one sentence caught my attention. Executive Administrative Override approved by Eleanor Price. The date matched the day everything fell apart. I looked up slowly. She authorized access using executive credentials. Victoria nodded. Your employee account was never the original source. It was used afterward to hide activity that had already taken place. I stared at the paper in disbelief. So someone knew I could not have done it. Yes. Her voice was almost a whisper. And instead of admitting the investigation was incomplete, they allowed it to end with your name attached to it. The bakery suddenly felt very quiet again. I expected anger to rush back into my heart, but instead I felt an overwhelming sadness for the woman I had been 5 years earlier. She had begged for one more chance to explain. She had believed the truth mattered. She had no idea the truth had already been buried. What happens now? I finally asked. Victoria folded her hands together. The board of directors called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. I searched her face. Because of Eleanor? Because of me. I frowned. She took a slow breath before continuing. Their attorneys want me to settle everything privately. They believe offering financial compensation will protect the company from public embarrassment. I could not help shaking my head. So they still think this is about money? Yes. She looked directly into my eyes. And I told them they were wrong. I remained silent as she continued. I told them that restoring your reputation matters more than protecting mine. I also informed them that if the company refuses to publicly correct the investigation, I will do it myself. My heart skipped. Do you know what that could cost you? A gentle smile crossed her face. Probably my position. The answer came so calmly that it took several seconds to fully reach me. For years I had imagined Victoria as someone whose entire identity depended on power, titles, and success. Yet the woman sitting across from me seemed strangely peaceful with the possibility of losing all three. Lily walked over carrying her drawing. Mom, she said proudly, look. The picture showed our bakery surrounded by smiling people. Standing beside me was another woman with brown hair, both of us holding trays of bread while children laughed around us. Who is this? I asked with a smile even though I already knew the answer. Lily looked at Victoria as though the question were obvious. She is helping now. Victoria's eyes glistened for just a moment before she thanked Lily for the drawing. I looked from my daughter to the woman across the table and realized something had quietly changed between us. She was no longer asking me to believe her words. She was asking me to watch her choices. Later that afternoon, as Victoria prepared to leave for the board meeting in the city, she paused at the bakery door and looked back. Whatever happens tomorrow, she said, I will not allow your story to remain hidden any longer, even if telling the truth costs me everything I have spent my life building. The following afternoon the sky over Cedar Grove turned gray, and a steady autumn rain settled across Main Street as if the town itself had decided to hold its breath. I kept checking my phone between customers, not because I expected good news, but because silence had become harder to bear than disappointment. Every time the bakery door opened, I found myself looking up, wondering if Victoria would walk through it. She never did. Hours passed before my phone finally rang just after 4 o'clock. Her voice sounded calm, but beneath that calm I could hear exhaustion. The meeting is over, she said. I closed the bakery a few minutes early and listened without speaking. The board voted to release an independent report confirming that the investigation against you was deeply flawed, she continued. Your employment record is being formally corrected, and the company will issue a public statement accepting responsibility for the failures in the investigation. I closed my eyes, waiting for the relief I had imagined for years. Instead, I felt tears gathering because no document could return the birthdays I had missed while working extra jobs, the interviews that ended before they truly began, or the nights I had quietly wondered whether Lily deserved a mother who had not failed so completely. Victoria seemed to understand my silence. Claire, she said softly, I know this cannot give you those years back. No, I answered. But maybe another woman will never lose hers because someone finally decided the truth mattered. There was a long pause before she spoke again. I also resigned as Chief Executive Officer this afternoon. My heart stopped for a moment. You resigned? The board wanted the statement released without a public acknowledgement of executive responsibility. I could not ask the company to admit mistakes while pretending I had none. I approved the decision that ended your career. Even though I did not know the investigation was incomplete, I still signed my name. That responsibility belongs to me. I leaned against the counter, unable to find the right words. Outside, the rain grew heavier, tapping gently against the bakery windows. Less than an hour later the bell above the door rang, and Victoria walked inside carrying nothing except a folded umbrella. She no longer looked like one of the most powerful executives in the country. She looked like a tired woman who had finally stopped running from her own conscience. We sat together beside the front window with 2 cups of coffee while Lily finished reading a library book at the corner table. For several minutes neither of us spoke. Finally Victoria broke the silence. I used to believe leadership meant never admitting uncertainty, she said quietly. Now I think leadership begins the moment someone is willing to say they were wrong. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug, feeling its warmth against my fingers. Do you know what forgiveness is not? She looked at me with quiet curiosity. I smiled sadly. It is not pretending nothing happened. It is not forgetting. It is not saying the pain did not matter. She nodded slowly. Then what is it? I looked through the rain-covered window where the reflection of the bakery lights shimmered across the wet sidewalk. It is deciding that the worst day of my life does not deserve to control every day that comes after it. Neither of us said another word for a while. Lily eventually walked over carrying a folded piece of paper. I made something for you, she told Victoria. It was a drawing of the bakery with all 3 of us standing outside beneath a bright yellow sun. Above the building she had written in careful handwriting, "Everybody deserves another chance." Victoria accepted the picture with both hands as though it were something priceless. A tear slipped quietly down her cheek before she smiled at Lily. I will keep this forever, she whispered. As Lily returned to her table, Victoria looked back at me. There was no expectation in her eyes, no request, no pressure. Only honesty. Without thinking, I reached across the small table and gently placed my hand over hers. She looked surprised but did not move. It was the first time I had chosen to close the distance between us, not because the past had disappeared, but because I finally believed the woman sitting across from me was no longer hiding from it. 1 year later, the first thing people noticed was that the little white sign on the bakery door no longer said "permanently closed." In its place hung a hand-painted wooden plaque that read "Community Bread Program," and every Saturday morning the warm smell of fresh bread drifted through Main Street long before the sun climbed above the rooftops. The bakery had survived, but more importantly, it had found a new purpose. Families gathered around long wooden tables to learn how to bake together. Single mothers searching for a fresh start learned practical skills alongside retired neighbors who volunteered simply because they wanted to help. Teenagers earned community service hours while discovering that patience and kindness could be just as valuable as any lesson taught in a classroom. Every loaf carried a small paper tag with the same handwritten message: "Everyone deserves another chance." The idea had started with one conversation over coffee and slowly became something much bigger than either Victoria or I could have imagined. She never tried to buy the bakery, place her name above the entrance, or turn our story into a publicity campaign. Instead, she quietly introduced local business owners, nonprofit organizations, and vocational programs that believed in helping people rebuild their lives with dignity rather than pity. She worked beside everyone else, washing mixing bowls, carrying flour, greeting customers, and celebrating every small success without asking for recognition. A few months after the public report was released, the company's board invited Victoria to return as chief executive officer after implementing a completely new employee review and appeals process based on independent oversight and transparent investigations. She accepted, but only after making one promise that she never broke. No decision affecting someone's career would ever again be approved without a meaningful opportunity for that person to be heard. The policy eventually became a model adopted by several other organizations, proving that one painful mistake could become the beginning of lasting change if people were willing to learn from it instead of hiding it. My corrected employment record arrived in the mail one quiet afternoon, accompanied by a handwritten letter from Victoria. She did not ask for forgiveness again because she understood that forgiveness had already become something we practiced through everyday choices rather than repeated conversations. I framed the official letter restoring my professional reputation, but I placed it in the office instead of the front of the bakery. The document mattered, yet it no longer defined me. The life built inside these walls did. Lily was now 9 years old, and every Saturday she proudly welcomed children into the bakery with the confidence of someone who had grown up believing that kindness could change strangers into neighbors. Sometimes I caught her explaining recipes while Victoria listened with complete attention, smiling as though those ordinary moments were the greatest reward life had ever given her. Watching the two of them together always reminded me that healing rarely arrived in dramatic speeches. More often it appeared in quiet mornings, shared laughter, warm bread cooling on wooden racks, and people choosing to show up for one another again and again. One crisp autumn evening, after the last customer had gone home, Victoria and I stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee just as the streetlights flickered on. The bakery windows glowed behind us, filled with laughter from volunteers cleaning up after another successful class. She looked at the building before turning toward me. "A year ago I thought I came here to fix a mistake," she said softly. "Now I know I came here to become a better person." I smiled, gently taking her hand as naturally as breathing. "And I thought losing everything had ended my story," I replied. "It turns out it was only leading me to the chapter where I finally understood what really matters." We stood together beneath the golden leaves as Lily locked the bakery door with a proud smile and hurried over to join us. The three of us walked slowly down Main Street toward home while warm light spilled through the bakery windows behind us, welcoming tomorrow's visitors before they had even arrived. Looking back now, I understand that second chances are not about returning to the life we once had. They are about becoming the kind of person who can open a door for someone else who believes every door has already been closed, because the greatest success is never measured by power, wealth, or titles, but by how many lives become brighter simply because we chose compassion over judgment, truth over convenience, and love over fear.